My strings are often what is left after I straightened a piece of fabric. In my string box, I also have leftover strip sets like this. They'll just add character to the project. It's so much nicer to work with scrap pieces if you just take care of them right away, because if you just throw them in a box and let them get wrinkled, then you need to press them before they're a usable piece. I'm a recycler. I like these peach boxes. They just stack together and I put them on top of the closet until I'm ready to work with my strings. The next part you'll need are some foundations. And I just take an old phone book, grab a few pages at a time, then cut into my usable sizes. What I'm doing here right now is 6.5-inch strips, but thinking about it, for a beginner, don't go bigger than 5-inch pieces for now. Sometimes it can be a little difficult to handle strings when you're not sure what's going on. And then I'm making kind of a half square triangle, so I'm marking my diagonal, and you'll see what we do later with that. I'm using my treadle machine for this job. This project is a perfect way to use a machine that you're just getting used to. The seam allowance isn't that critical on this project, and also for beginners because you can practice sewing a straight line. The way I do this first part is kind of like paper piecing. I'm aligning about 1/4 inch away from the edge. There's a selvage here, so I'm just backing up a little bit. Align this line pretty much parallel to the seam line, and you're going to stitch on the line. I haven't noticed extra dulling of the needles when using this method. If you notice any problem with the stitches, that's maybe an indicator that you need a new needle. These two strings, I picked a contrast. Each side of my square, I'm using a light on one side and a dark on the other. And since there's a lot of string left, I just feed through another square. I try to use up all my strings that I pick because this project can get pretty messy if you grab a bunch of strings and have them lay out. See what I mean? How this is good practice to sew on the straight line. I'm just guiding it with this hand, trying to keep it steady. Snip them apart, and then if you start sewing so you can see the light side, then when you flip it over, the seam will be pressed to the dark side. Okay, then you just pick a side and do the next color. I just kind of stockpiled a little bit wider pieces for when we get to the corner. And here's how I have my strings on my little cabinet here is folded open, and I'm going to use mostly those strings until they're used up before I pull some more from my box. Otherwise, I'll just have piles and piles of strings. It can be a messy job if you're not organized or careful about it. See here again, this has the selvage, but that's hanging off the edge of the paper. I do sometimes just trim it off beyond the paper, so it's easier to handle so you don't have a big string. And just like before, I kind of chain piece, but it's a little more awkward this way. I just turn that sideways. And if you're uncertain, use a generous seam allowance. I'm kind of skirting the edge of it there. You don't have to do it that way. And here's the next one. So I'm just finger pressing it. If you want to have an iron next to your sewing station, I've done it that way too. I don't have room where I'm working right now. Okay, then you keep sewing like that until the square is finished, and that's why I have some wider pieces. And even you can go into your 2.5-inch strip bin, something to cover the corner. You might need something wider because 1/4 inch will be taken off of this edge once you sew the blocks together, and 1/4 inch off this edge. So if you wait and just sew a little piece across there, you'll just be cutting off the seam allowances, and that last piece, you won't even see that last piece. So let me show you how I do the corner. See, here's a little bigger piece. This is on the dark side of a triangle now. It's kind of fun because you're creating your own fabric. I work at a fabric store, and some of these pieces I dug out of the garbage, but they understand this is who I am. I can't see things go to waste. I know, I'm a little on the weird side. And then fold it over, and then it covers that edge. Then you would just keep sewing with another light. When I turn it over to trim, then that will be eaten up in the seam allowance. So that little tiny bit probably isn't that big of a deal, but I can just adjust this down a little bit. I'm also looking here, the white of my selvage, and here's the dark side. And here I can twist it a little bit. I look all the way around to make sure that my 6.5 is covered, and then I can trim. So everything is complete to the corners, and the important part about the paper is just to make sure that I cover that 6.5-inch square. It's not important that that goes out to the full 6.5. It's just my guide. It's just my foundation and my reference to what 6.5 inches is. So I make sure to go all the way to the corners, and so I fill a whole 6.5-inch square. A couple other things I want to show is that you can make just a 2-color square. I have a project started where it's multiple colors, so a lot of these would work for that. And here I have a couple gray ones, multis. You can probably tell I'm thinking of doing something with grays with the red. I want to mix it in with this and maybe make something patriotic. And here, you may have noticed this one. Here was part of a strip set. I didn't know what to do with it, but I sure didn't want to throw it away. So then I put it in here. Also, if you wind up with a bunch of small pieces and you just want to make a bigger square like this, if you need something to make this go further, you can piece as if it is a long strip, and that adds a lot of character and interest to your block also. The main things are just remember to pull out a few strings at a time, work on a couple blocks at a time, fill those out so you feel more successful, like you're accomplishing something, instead of just having 10 or 20 like this to deal with. And if the colors are kind of looking the same, or like here I have these and I have these, once they're mixed into your block, you're not going to notice that a couple of them are very similar. It'll just all be scrappy and it'll blend in. So I hope you try it, and I hope to see some of your efforts sometime.